Okay, I'm just going live in LinkedIn. All right. Hey, everybody. Timo here. Welcome to session 2 today of basin.live, where we are looking at the Gitcoin Alpha Round or the Gitcoin Climate Round, talking to a bunch of different projects, doing things over in Web3, blockchain, crypto, climate, nature, regeneration, biodiversity, whatnot. This session right here, I'm super excited to have James and Nick from different legal and real estate projects we're working with. We'll get into all the different funny alphabet soup names here, but primarily Tater DAO, Cougar DAO, and Real World Assets Consortium. So welcome to the show, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks, Timo. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Well, I think probably the best place to start is with Tater DAO, because that's the grant you have, and I'll drop the link here in a minute. But this is streaming over on LinkedIn and streaming over on YouTube as well. So let's be careful to not use too many acronyms and jargon, or if we do, let's maybe just back up a minute and like explain what an RWA is, or what refi is, or what MRV, or all the different slang terms, and all the different alphabet soup like Lex DAO and Kali DAO and everything. But why don't you just explain what Tater is, and then we can start to plug the gaps in like how Cougar and all these other ones, Kali, work together.
Yeah, sounds good. Nick, you want to take a stab at it, or you?
Yeah, no, I'm good. Sorry, it was calls. There's a lot of buttons going on in my office right now. So go ahead.
So Tater DAO is basically an NFT project that tries to relate real world assets, real property, and use NFTs for as tokens that can be managed on blockchain environments. The reason that that's helpful is just that a lot of NFTs only have certain kind of fields of data that they can show, and like what makes that a little bit more powerful is the ability to verify and check certain aspects of real property, like who's the owner, where is this property, what's it look like, what's its classification, and all those kinds of data sources that we try to expose and make it where it's more useful as a token on a digital, on a distributed ledger on a blockchain.
Yeah, so I'll simplify what James is the big brain stuff, so I'll make it for the rest of us stupid people. Like real estate and land classification data has always been kind of a closed, siloed area, and our idea was to make that as open source and visible as possible, which hopefully in the end will improve ecological and climate practices, knowing how a property is zoned, what type of property is, how you might develop it for climate related purposes, and if we could get that information more visible and trackable, we might also be able to reduce transaction costs related to transfers of property. I hope that is a little bit more of the layperson speak there.
Yeah. I mean, what I associate it to is like almost like title abstracting, or simplifying the process of what a property is zoned, who owns it, pictures, other metadata, as James says, around the property, and putting it all on chain. And kind of like a Tater to me, right, is like a good, you can maybe explain how the name, you can't put the name, but like I view it as like a good, like solid chunk of property and all the different things that, attach to a property and how you track it and how you start to transfer it. So to me, like title insurance, title abstracting, public record data, that all comes to mind when I think of a Tater.
Yeah, I think you're right on there, and to some degree, like it's kind of a nuance of blockchains. Like blockchains can kind of only see the things that are on the blockchain. Like they can't see who owns a property in Skokie, Illinois, right? So to make some people have heard of smart contracts, which are basically just the ability to, create kind of programmable and certain, relationships, like basically contracts that are on chain. So if this happens, then then something else can happen. And, example of that is if I pay somebody a token, then the ledger realizes that the other person is now the owner of it. That's easy to do because it's on chain. Real property is not on chain. So to some degree, like that's kind of the first aspect is bringing kind of more verifiable real world data on chain so that other smart contracts and real contracts, lawyers and business people can arrange contracts around that data basically is a basket of information, just like they do in the real world, right? Like it's not that different than having data on a website. It just, the difference is you have a token that kind of is almost like a programmable website. It's a fungible website that has all this metadata related to it so that you can hopefully do more things with it.
Yeah, like people, I think, at least in my experience, when they hear NFT, they think, oh, it's just an expensive piece of art or a JPEG. But when when I start to explain to people, I'm like, well, tell me how you own your car. And they're like, well, I own my car. And it's like, well, no, well, what gives you ownership of the car? It's like, well, the title, the piece of paper, the official. An NFT is just an electronic title, right? Or like, so tell me how you own your house, right? Or your office space or your building. And same thing. Oh, the deed. And it's like, well, an NFT, right? It's a non-fungible token of your ownership. And to me, like Nick said, with like lowering transaction costs, if you can start to like send people, you can transact with an NFT without actually having to have a big closing, and all these different fees and intermediaries and whatnot. It speeds up and lowers those costs.
Yeah, I think that's probably our grand vision of where this could go. But we're more infrastructure level to kind of build out things to get there in the long term. I think in the long term, I should say that's where we'd love to go, is make this simpler transfers, right? That would be the white whale. But I think you're exactly right, Thomas. And when people hear about NFTs, I just try and like back that off a level and say, look, it's just another file type. That's all it is. But it's got identifiers in that file type that will allow you to say that this one person had it, now this other person does, or this wallet.
And let me state how it's different than that, because it's a different kind of, file type. I think you're starting to see some of the legal structures to try to arrange around how to define this and how it is different than just, like a database entry that's not a database, is that it's, they call it like data objects in the UK, right? So when I think of property interest, like a property right, like my house, it's the right to exclude others from it, right? Like I own my house. What does that mean? Well, that means I can keep you out, right? Like you don't get to show up unless you're invited, and like all the other things. Like, so a property right's the right to exclude. And it's kind of weird because like with distributed ledgers like that, like an NFT, like that NFT is my property, right? Like I get to have that. The only way you get to have it is if I share it with you. I can put it into a smart contract, or I can make it move. But in some ways, it takes a digital property right and makes it where you can also have that right to exclude, which people are experimenting with whether that creates value or doesn't. And I think it will, for the reasons you said, that like for a car title, you can make it where it's very, first of all, it'll be a mirrored asset. It'll represent your car title records that are in your city, or your state, or wherever it's registered with the authorities. And mirrored is going to be helpful too. And at some point, like I would assume that certain jurisdictions are going to try to cut costs, and that they'll do it through using technologies similar to these, where they'll have their property record will be on chain, because it's just a good way of keeping track of who owns what.
Yeah, no, it's still the bundle of rights idea, just in a file type rather than in a hard document somewhere.
So go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, where to me it gets interesting, and I think where we're experimenting with Cougar and Collie is the LLC interest, right? I think it becomes more difficult if like James owns a house, right, and your name's on the deed. It's hard to transfer ownership as an NFT because the deed is in your name. However, if Cougar DAO LLC owns a farm in Colorado, which it does, being spun up through a Kali DAO LLC contract. You can transfer those LLC interests, right, like to someone else, and they, if they become the landlord, and they go to the farmer tenant and say, we now own the property, redirect rent payments to us, right? It's a digital file, and as Nick said, on chain, that everyone can see who owns it and who has possession of it.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I look, we call a lot of these like digital primitives, right? Like TaterDAO to me is just one little primitive that hopefully other projects can use and roll into their projects to handle real world assets. And one example of that is, you referred to Kali DAO, which is another group from the big brains at LexDAO, where you can create digital organizations. So in other words, they're basically organizations that are managed by code for the most part. They defer to code for certain of their kind of consensus mechanisms. What does that mean? Well, like, I'm part of an LLC. Like how do I come to a consensus? I can sit around a round table and we can all raise our hands, or we can commit certain data to a blockchain that gets recorded on chain. And I think, you kind of mentioned the power of that. The power of that's going to be is that you can move, assets and value on chain once you have digital organizations that kind of own real property. And that's, in a nutshell, that's what Cougar DAO is, right?
Yeah.
It's an LLC. It's registered in Wyoming. It owns real property, in Colorado, and the members have agreed to use a smart contract or code to kind of manage their governance mechanisms, their LLC membership interests.
Right. And that's just, that kind of really goes back to essentially the same thing we were talking about, of reducing transaction costs. The reason we tested this out with Cougar DAO, which is a sort of a spin-off of TaterDAO, which is in the Gitcoin Alpha round, was we wanted to test out these kind of an LLC managed by crypto rails, conducting actions with a wide variety of real property interests in the real world. And how do we do that? If you break it down to really simplifying it, we're still just managing property with software, right? Or managing a company with software. Just happens to be blockchain software. If we extrapolate out what it is. And so we wanted to do that and see, because we knew kind of two things going into it, right? That raising money was really fast, or not even raising money, yeah, I guess we'll call it that, without saying that we did like a raise. We didn't do a raise, but aggregating money became really quick. It was really fast. We did that. You participated, Tom, and we thought, okay, that's interesting. Now, what else can we make that? Again, part of that. How do we reduce transaction costs? How do we reduce friction in the real world? Those are some of the items that we're trying to use this proof of concept to establish.
And a lot of where I'm, where I'm interested in is more from almost like a small business standpoint. So like, how does that happen in the real world, where you have three farmers that sit around a big round table, and they say, I'm going to contribute to our joint venture, our LLC. I'm going to contribute to machinery. And the other guys, well, I have land, I'll contribute to land. And the other guys, like, I'm a hard worker, and I'll do some of the hard work in order to make this all work. And that's kind of the definition of like an LLC, right? Everyone's doing the work, everyone's contributing, everyone's managing that entity, but they've raised the capital through contributions of, land, work, or machinery, rolling stock kind of stuff, and they have a venture, and that's how like a lot of things get done. And I do think that blockchain technology, when it starts to kind of get abstracted and be a little easier to use, will work in a similar manner, where a few people, and maybe in a little bit more of a spread out across the United States, because you can do it over the internet, right?
Yep.
So a few people that know each other on the internet can collaborate in order to either take down a real piece of property or start a business, or back to the climate round. What I see is having entities that aren't necessarily LLCs. They can be, but they could be trusts. Trusts, the legal entity trusts are also more or less of contract. It's almost like, how do I make a fiduciary duty and wrap that into a legal agreement? And I think that's also ripe for being able to manage things on chain. And what I mean by that is we could take which I don't think we were planning on it, but we could take our farm in Colorado and, agree to send that into another managed, entity, let's call it a Cully trust, and have that entity be able to manage that property in the real world through public and open consensus. You can see what the votes are. That you could see that they agreed to, allow somebody to go harvest the grain off there, but they're also keeping the windrows up there for ecological benefit or for pheasant, mitigation to have pheasants be able to use the property more, or maybe you open it up to the public, in certain aspects. And I think that's where, my idea is the more of these things you can start to plug into each other, the more valuable the whole, network becomes. So.
And that's exactly it for me, James, and what we're working on at Basin, and where I see the power of Tater in Cougar's experiments, right? Like we're experimenting over in like the traditional like real estate world with a normal drylands farm in Colorado with a bunch of attorneys, right, and real estate people. But like if we can work this stuff out, like the primitives, like you're saying, and like these little pieces that plug together, then all of a sudden we can start to scale regenerative actions, land restoration, land conservation, ecosystem services ownerships, community governance, distributed ownership from the bottom up. There's a lot of power for the climate, carbon, nature movement. This alphabet soup that we're working on over here, right, I think is going to be I predict and I'm hoping will be the foundation for what makes up the next economy.
I think so. I mean, I'd like to see that happen. I'd like to see many of these things happen, really. Certainly, I'm lazy enough to want to reduce friction wherever possible, right? That's my takeaway from Web 2. So, and the real world is filled with friction. I mean, we noticed it in the purchase of Cougar, or of the Hoxton property. We noticed, we still had banking difficulties. We still had wire issues. We still had things that when we raised earnest money, or got earnest money commitments, really, from those of us who wanted to participate, it was immediate, right? Okay, well, we sent it to the Treasury. Now when we're trying to pay the title company and actually transfer the money, we had to do it in a variety of different transfers, and all those things take time and effort, and so if we could reduce some of those, it just makes life easier. And real estate transfers, real estate transfers are fairly exhausting in the real world. So how do we kind of reduce that friction and speed that process up?
Yeah, I mean, to me, Nick, like one of the big unlocks for climate, I think, and land restoration, regeneration, ecosystem services is being able to potentially bring on other owners, other partners, other voting interests, other governance levels, and being able to move those entities around or add or subtract those different membership interests as needed to make a project work. So that's number one. And then number two, the splitting of the income of like who's doing what, right? Are they a financial partner? Or as James said, are they the landowner, or are they the user of the land, the tenant of the land, or the regenerator, like using like 0x splits or even just other custom smart contracts to be able to split the income streams, the governance responsibilities, bring in other partners, other maybe even NGOs or public partners, financing partners. Like I think like what I'm excited for with the Cougar DAO experiment is like the on-chain leasing income, as well as the transferring of the interest, and just seeing where that goes and what happens with it.
Go ahead, James. Or you're muted. James, you're muted.
I started a Medium post on the Cougar Pawn Shop, basically, which should explore those ideas on navigating through how to take. Basically, the idea is that decentralized finance, which you may have heard a little bit about, but basically a lot of it works on, um, you know, ownership by possession, right? Like it turns everything into into where on chain you control certain things, and like I said, you have the right to exclude everybody else or to let somebody else have possession of that. And what that enables is almost like a pawn shop model of lending, where somebody holds your digital tokens and then they can issue other digital tokens in return as a loan. And if you want to redeem that, you can. And if you don't, then there's a liquidation mechanism that happens. And why I'm kind of excited about that is it kind of abstracts away a lot of the legal friction costs that we have associated with, foreclosure, with having to perfect on a promissory note as an example, having to litigate in courts. It's more of a kind of like a sale leaseback model, if you will.
And I'll take another stab at something you were just saying, Tom, that I thought, we often talk about, having other interests in the property. Maybe it's the nonprofit eco masters who are running a property or leasing a property for some reason, or leasing a part of a property to do something. But think about many people in estate planning who have certain farmlands or forestry land or something to that effect. Oftentimes in their estate plans, they want to transfer that property to a nonprofit who then cares for it in the long term, right? Now, generally, when they divest themselves, there's a process. They're very, legal. Sometimes it's probate-based process that actually takes time for that nonprofit to take over and begin maintaining or conserving this piece of property that Doris wanted to give to them. And I'm thinking, well, what if there's faster ways that these transfers can be made at that time? More convenient transferring of property or of access to it. If I'm already planning that this is going to them when I die, maybe I want to give them some early access here somehow. And can we do that with the metadata? And I look at the taters themselves as sort of a listing, just a property listing, not too dissimilar to a Redfin or a Zillow. But I guess the goal would be to have as much possible real-time data in that listing, right? In that tater.
Yeah, I mean, Nick, I love the example of like estate planning and like stewardship of like who cares for the land and who the land transfers to. And we always joke amongst our this legal group of like usufruct, right? Of like the use and the fruit of the land versus the land itself. And I think there's a lot of like tooling, right? That's going to make this faster, easier, and more transparent, right? If like the goal of like climate and nature and biodiversity is to establish the commons, right, or steward the commons, like yeah, there's definitely use cases, right, to keep all this stuff private and for estates and people to own it. You want to certain things you want to keep private about your your personal business, but like for this greater like climate movement, nature movement, biodiversity stuff, like what better solution is there than on-chain transparent transactions, and being able to customize it as needed.
Yeah. James, you have anything to add to my dead Doris example?
No, I mean, I mean, right on. Well, like what digital organization? Once again, like we're at the beginnings of this internet kind of all come together, right? And some people call it the metaverse. People think that wear these goggles and it's gonna, Mark Zuckerberg's gonna, have all your stuff, which is definitely his vision of it, right? But on the other hand, in reality, what we're all doing is we're all kind of starting to become more internet like native. Like a lot of our businesses, like a lot of our income streams are internet native. A lot of are we social influencers? How much of my business am I marketing on the internet? And at some level, just like any kind of data can be transferred through the internet, so can value, and I think those two things will become kind of interwoven, and I think that like that's where this stuff starts to become much more powerful is when we have internet native organizations like you can mint from CullyDAO, and then you can use those to relate to real world assets. Farms can be property titles, or it can just be parts of that. Once again, we're talking about maybe subterranean rights. The legal world already handles all this stuff. I can sever the mineral interest from the farm in Colorado, or like we were talking about earlier, I could put gravel pit swimming pools in there if I wanted to mine the gravel off some of it. As the one who owns the top, I can sometimes scrape that land off. And the real question is like how do we manage both things? Like we need gravel for roads, I guess, but we also need to make sure that we're not we're preserving the things that are important to the greater good to some extent. And how do we kind of incentivize those behaviors? And I do think that being on the internet makes it a little easier to coordinate things that were previously much harder to do. And one of those examples might be, wildlife diversity, or, even things like access rights. Trail systems are much more valuable if they're tied into other trail systems. Like in Idaho here, where I am, basically the fishing game will pay certain landholders a portion, a little bit of value if they make their property available to other hunters to be able to use, as part of the public good. Does it have to be hunters? No, it can just be hikers, or you can just put nature's first class citizens where you make your property more available to that. And I think that's where the power comes in, is when it becomes easier and internet native to hitch these things together, to stitch these things together.
Yeah, I mean, I love that in terms of, that's like what the basin stack, right, we hope to be, or some of the RWA, like, we didn't even touch on the RWA consortium, but like the open interoperable standards for real world assets that we've been talking about, is like, what are those different layers of ownership, use, financing that can be put on chain and then, be interoperable and composable with each other. So that, to me, that's where the unlock is going to happen. Like that was the other thing I wanted to mention about Cougar DAO, is like, I'm excited for this kind of financing, use this DeFi financing experiment of how can we actually borrow money against an NFT, right? It's real estate, right? But it's like, it's an on-chain representation of real estate.
Yep. It's we're doing all these things that are maybe fun or they're cutting edge and they're difficult, and it requires some legal engineering and a mix of legal technology and property technology, and it's not the easiest thing in the world. But I think most of us who are involved in a variety of these things, right? Basin, Cougar, Tater, we're all part of this real world assets consortium that kind of stemmed from LexDAO. And I think we're all just having fun with it, right? Like that's a big part of, we want to accomplish some things that maybe make my life easier as a property manager in my future, or as a small business real estate person in my future. James, a lot of us have family related businesses that are real estate, involve real estate. And I think that's our goal. There's a lot of other folks' goals out there who, there's grand visions that maybe aren't rooted in realism or reality. And ours are more infrastructure level, about how would we make our lives easier, and then how do we build for that. And we've been having a heck of a good time doing it. I think you guys will have to tell me.
That's what one thing I wanted to say, Nick, was like, I think that the conversation we just had over the last 30 minutes was fairly serious about like the technical aspects of what we're doing. But like, one of the best parts for me, right, and I joked around in the Telegram about it, is like the jokes and the memes and the taters and basins and cougars and Lexes and farms and maps and whatever. But
Yeah.
and like we're having a good time. And Kyle and I talked about that about Lexdow's Twitter post the other day of like they did a survey, right, of like does Lexdow want to be like stuffy attorney, like serious post, or do we want to keep shit posting and joke around and keep using slang words? And like I was all for the latter, like
Yeah.
that's why I'm here.
I agree. I think a lot of us came here from, if you come from real estate, or you come from the legal space, which several of us do, they're stuffier, kind of old school operations, right? So many of us are involved in this space because it's just more fun than the professions in which we grew up.
Better than our day job. I jump in there for sure. I'd rather do this than practice law any day.
And
Yeah.
you guys know Will is an attorney also. So it's fun. I love all these calls with attorneys, right? No one could tell. I think that three of us, and I won't say who's not the attorney here, but three of us are attorneys. So
Yeah, and I really need to get into Lexdow and RWAC both. I just need to. I'm not native to Arbitrum and haven't bridged yet.
We're figuring it. We've gone back and forth. Tater's on Arbitrum. Now we're trying to make it multi-chain, and there's difficulties with all these. We thought it would make more sense to be strictly in Arbitrum when we started. Parts of that are true, but
I like Terra. That's where we wanted to start, was Terra.
Worked good till it didn't.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly right, man. That's funny.
Cool. Well, Nick and James, thanks for coming, for sharing about Tater and Cougar and RWA Consortium, Lexdow, whatnot. The link to support the TaterDAO grant is in the chat there. You can go to Gitcoin and look for the Climate Alpha Round to support Tater. So everyone head on over there and donate some ETH or DAI and get them some matching funds. So thanks for your time, guys.
No, thank you. Yeah, please donate. We appreciate everyone, and help Dead Doris.
Yep, help Dead Doris transfer that property to Basin DAO.
Yes. So you guys, James and Nick, you're welcome to stick around, but if you don't mind just switching the link from just exiting the guest link and go to the basin.live link. And yeah, feel free to chat, and we'll welcome Will Masters to the show in a minute. But I just want to reiterate that we're here talking about the Gitcoin Climate Round, or the Gitcoin Alpha Round. Gitcoin has raised approximately $70 million over the last several years for open source public goods. They've raised a couple $1 million for climate. This current round has $333,000 of matching funds available for climate projects like the ones we're featuring. This is being live streamed over on LinkedIn and YouTube as well. You can drop your comments, questions, and whatnot in the chats over there, or come over to basin.live and ask Will questions. But Will, welcome to the show. Will is a leader in the refi movement. He's involved in all sorts of different projects. And we're here today specifically to talk about Demeter and MRV. But Will's other project is Life. Did I say it right, Will?
Yeah, as far as I know, yes, that's how I say it, basically.
that's you taught me that lesson in our last interview. So
I learned that from these college kids. They did a presentation on it, and they just that was how they started, was let's all say it together, because it's just a weird word, Ogallala
Life. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
But Will's doing a lot of different stuff around agriculture and water and rehydration in aquifers and whatnot. And then Demeter is in the MRV space, measurement, reporting, and verification, which is big in carbon. But our take is it's going to be even bigger in biodiversity and natural capital, ecological assets. So Will, why don't you give us a rundown of Demeter and what you're raising funds for?
Cool. Yes, so Demeter is a little bit hard to explain, and it is the most novel of like organizations I've ever been a part of. And so there's a lot of talk about like a DAO is a distributed or decentralized autonomous organization, and Demeter is like the most DAO-like of my experience. Really kind of interesting, and it would not be possible if it wasn't for Gitcoin. I mean, Gitcoin gave Demeter its start, and Demeter's been able to raise. I'm hesitant to have like $50,000, maybe more, over multiple Gitcoin rounds, and that has enabled us to build a team and put together like a longer term strategy. You know, thinking not just about tomorrow, and work to build DMRV. And DMRV is kind of depending on who you're talking to, decentralized or distributed digital measurement, reporting, and validation tools. And as Timo said, that is generally referenced in a carbon credit context. So like I'm going to have a forest, or I'm going to plant this forest and I'm going to protect it, and MRV happens over the course of that contract to make sure I'm doing what I said I'm going to do, and to make sure that the carbon is increasing in the soil or biomass, whatever they're trying to measure. And so anyway, that's where it's from. Demeter we had a discussion about this in the fall of 2022 in terms of like DMRV for what, you know, like it's such a huge thing, like what, and we chose like it is intentionally in a natural capital and an ecosystem function context. And so that would include a bunch of different carbon credit, carbon credit MRV, but not exclusively. And that is, I think, a bet on the future of natural capital accounting, which it sounds kind of crazy, but I don't know how else. Yeah.
No, but a lot of this stuff sounds crazy, right? If you listen to the previous conversation around laws, LLCs and transferring taters, right, or transferring NFTs as ownership interest in a property. Or even bioregional organization. Joe Brewer is going to be on next, and we're going to be talking about regenerating landscapes via bioregions. So I think, Will, and I think you agree that like we'll look back on this in a few years and we thought we were crazy, but we really weren't.
I hope so. That would be better than the alternative, which is to learn that we've been crazy all along. But I think that's like the truth is like the world's crazy. I mean, like we're self-harmful, even like the best of us, yeah, it sounds crazy that, like I can send you a Tater NFT and that transfers real interest in a real hard asset in the real world. But that is less crazy, I would suggest, than the current schema, which is you have these gazillion different entities, many of them LLCs owned by different entities, many of them limited liability in different states. And then you have fractionalized and severed interests. And we have this whole super complex scheme that determines who owns property and who gets it in certain circumstances and who can pump or whatever. And that scheme, the miraculous or remarkable thing is that it works at all. I mean, it's and it does, but it is tremendously inefficient. It is centralized. It is curated in a sense because we have these gatekeepers, I suppose, like realtors, lawyers, and you need a realtor or you need a lawyer to protect your butt, right? But that's because this system is so complex and built on these different legal fictions. And so anyway, yes, like the type of governance or marketplaces we're proposing is radically new, and it does sound crazy, but it is not. Knock on wood.
Yep, I'll knock on wood with you there. We wouldn't be here if we didn't believe in it. The point, Will, right, of like streaming this over on LinkedIn and YouTube is to like show the rest of the world that like Web3, blockchain, crypto, which over the last year have become, several years they've been bad words, right? Scammy, casino, whatnot. But like there's real projects being created around law and policy and impact and soil and water and digital measuring, reporting, and verification, around carbon and biodiversity and natural capital. So like that's like what would you say to people over on LinkedIn or YouTube of like why blockchain, right? Or why Web3?
What else? Yeah, like it's that's why is because we can change things. Like I tried, or I thought I could do some good in, like, the legal system. But it's a friend of mine tried to run for groundwater, the GCD, Groundwater Conservation District Board. And it's an elected position, and he's a good guy, and like he wants to do good, but like I suggest that, like, kind of like the nature of the position, you can't do good, and so like our systems. Anyway, yeah. What else?
Yeah, it's I go back to that analogy of like under the hood, right? Like we don't even have to use those words of like what's actually providing the data or the transaction history or the ownership representation. Like we can get rid of those bad words, right? And it's just ledger technology. It's just, I mean, it's
Yeah.
no different, right, than like HTTPS or TPICP or whatever, that runs the internet, or the, your CNAME that runs your domain, or a subdomain. Like people don't have to know what all that
AT&T.
stuff is. Yeah, right. Um, so tell us
Sorry,
about
derailed.
like, yeah, no, it's all right. I'd like to talk about like the real projects that like right now, like you've had, like Timothy came down to Texas from Athena and put some IoT or some sensors on the site. You're doing a work week next week on a site outside of Amarillo for some landscape rehydration. Like, tell us how Demeter, right, fits into those projects and what you're hoping to accomplish.
So, cool. So you mentioned Tim. Tim is so we have this core team. There's like, I don't know, 7, and people have contributed and backed off and contributed. But Tim has been he was one of our original founders, in fact, and he's with Athena Protocol. And Athena Protocol is inspired by kind of like Helium and others. Like it incentivizes a mesh low raw WAN network, long range wireless access network. And so you could build wireless coverage over a big landscape, and that enables the taking of all kinds of different measurements. And again, the bet is that this data is going to be valuable. And so, well, this data, like data being, or data regarding the ecosystem function, landscape rehydration. All right. So that's who Tim is, and Athena Protocol is experimenting with Foam, which is another protocol built on another blockchain that's proof of location. And so, in theory, if I make a report, or if any like device reports a data reading, just whatever, sends a message on the Foam mesh network. It is an independent like it is attached to the actual physical location, and so it provides a means of proving one's location without GPS and so like there are just issues with GPS, and so anyway, and so Tim came down a number of months ago and installed this foam mesh. There's 4 nodes right now. We cover, I don't know, like 7 square miles of semi-arid rangeland, and we are putting out different types of sensors. I'm particularly interested in the biodiversity and audio, and so like microphones or whatnot. There's a whole lot that still needs to be figured out, but we're working on it. And it's not just Tim, although Tim is doing incredible. And so there's like a Seed Studio is this really neat store. It has a lot of cool like hacker DIY components, and they're really interested. It's just like the whole world, like the whole world is working on DMRV. It's like it's one of the hot issues because it enables us to have say digital twin, right? And so like a digital representation of the landscape, and then we can that digital twin can accompany like an NFT that represents its legal ownership, and DMRV can inform and the digital twin. And so you can look at this digital representation. It says the water height is 148 feet below the surface, and you can make a bet like that water height is 148 feet below the surface, at least right there. And that just kind of radically changes everything if it can be done in a cost-effective manner. And so that's one of the things that we are experimenting with. So Ogallala Life is a project that's kind of what got me into DMRV. And we started that about a year ago, and it's a nonprofit that's like using Web3 tools for watersheds and wetlands and water security in our bioregion or the High Plains Aquifer System. We've got access to some properties again outside of Amarillo and elsewhere, and we're making those available to DMRV experimentation and DeSci, decentralized science, or some people would say ReSci,
Cool.
which is like regenerative decentralized science. At least that's the idea. And so, yeah, we want to facilitate a network of region projects and make these like these protocols like tools. It helps us. It gives people a system. Like it's a lot easier to launch your project if you've got a system. You know, it's really hard to do it if you're going to not know. That's like the problem is we need a network. Rambling, but yeah, that's what we're trying to do here.
No, you're not rambling, Will. I mean, it makes perfect sense, and you're very articulate when you explain this stuff.
Thank you.
And why it makes sense. Like, the land, right? You're making land available to projects to experiment in. What I would see with Athena or Demeter, if you look at like the World Economic Forum post and what like HSBC and pollination and like normal finance, right, is doing the same stuff, and they need the tools, right? And they're like World Economic Forum is talking about DAOs, right? They're talking about usage of blockchain. They're talking about Internet of Things and IoT sensors, whatnot. So it's my personal opinion is we're not like over here in this weird like crazy land. It's converging. We're just using different terms, and we're maybe going about it in a different way rather than like we are a big corporation or we are a big NGO doing it. So
you might not feel like that in Boulder, or not Boulder, well, up in Colorado, but here in Texas Panhandle, I do still feel like I'm very much in crazy land because, well, we just don't talk about climate change. There's not money pouring into sustainability efforts. I mean, like we have a partnership with the sustainability team at West Texas A&M University, and like in their internal documentation, they don't use the word sustainability because it might cause issues. And I don't mean to.
I hope your things and your stream is encrypted, right? And we don't want people to hear you using these words in Amarillo.
Dude, amen. I said, yeah, amen. It's a legitimate concern, and I do not speak like my whole honest truth, and I can't. But part of that too is like so we've seen some carbon credit generation agreements that have been offered to different landowners around here. It says like, hey, let us monetize, change your grazing, let us monetize it or do something. And there's all kinds of problems, but one of the problems is the letter looks like it was written from somebody from California or Europe or something that doesn't believe in what like this part of the world. Like, it's just a really conservative area. And this isn't a problem unique to us. This is a problem all over where locals are kind of excluded from this marketplace because they don't know the lingo or they're not plugged into the international framework. Yeah, anyway, and so yeah, we're trying to like adapt this in a locally relevant way, and that extends to the real world and also like the landscape rehydration work, right? And so it's like we know that things have worked elsewhere, and we have a framework. We have ways of measuring it and doing it, etc. But like we need to show people here that it can work here. Like people need to believe in it. And if we can get them to believe in it, then I think that they can use it as a tool to invest in our own security. So like right now, our communities are running out of water. They know it. They can't afford to do anything about it, or they're doing what they can afford to do, which is buy groundwater rights from billionaires and kind of, well, anyway, yeah, they need new tools. And so we need to build these tools and demonstrate their effectiveness in a locally relevant way.
Yeah, I mean, I love that locally relevant way. Like, yes, Sev from Eco Labs was on the other day talking about the Impact app and talking about the agroforestry methodology for Regen Network. And they've kind of, at least from what I can understand, they're kind of separated it out into two different things. Like what is general, right, or global about agroforestry, but then also what is local or regional related to the species of wood, the biodiversity species, the local practices. So it's like this, here we are, right, talking, I'm in Colorado, you're in Texas, we're talking about the, global like issues, right? But like it has to be locally contextual, right? Place by place by place, project by project by project. So I love that, the locally relevant way. That's a great way of saying it.
Cool. And Sev and Ecolabs are awesome, and they are also in the meter. Sev is in our leadership team or whatever. So yeah, so support
Cool.
us.
So like go to the grant page here. Will posted the link in the chat. I'll copy and paste it over to YouTube and LinkedIn. But you can donate to any of these awesome climate projects over there. There's 40 individual projects and 10 bundles. And maybe that's, Will, let's talk about the other bundle that I think Ogallala is in the bundle,
Correct.
right?
Yep. Ogallala Life is in. We're one of 8 initiatives that are in the agriculture bundle. And I think it's like revolutionary or transformative because so the way money is allocated, like there's $400 billion in subsidies given out to agriculture every year globally, roughly. I would suggest that is done in an unbelievably inefficient and inequitable way. But like at least it works, right? Like we have these systems. I'm not saying like the systems are bad. I'm just saying like we have better systems. And so Gitcoin gives us it's an example of a way to distribute kind of public funds for public goods in a transparent and totally like democratic fashion. And so if we use this, then like $100 out of $100 would go to the forest that it's supposed to go to. And if it didn't, then the community it's adaptive. It's just better. It's not perfect, but it's better. And so we're really blessed to participate in this alpha round. And the ag bundle in particular is important because we need to demonstrate that this is a tool that could be used by governments and NGOs and international institutions. And this is happening. And so like Gitcoin had a deal with UNICEF in early December where they experimented with this elsewhere. Yeah, so no, it's awesome. Support the ag bundle too, please.
Yeah, and so the ag bundle is, if you go to Will's link here to Demeter, and then you click back, you can click back to grants. It will show you all the 40 individual climate grants, but then there's 10 bundles in there around ocean and forest and agriculture and impact and some other things. But
I'll share a link here too in just a moment.
Yeah, and Will was alluding to the public funding model of Gitcoin, which I think is super powerful, is the quadratic funding model. It's not about the amount of money that each person donates. It's about the number of people like that basically cast their votes for the project, and then it's quadratically funded. That the matching funds, the $333,000 for climate over the next, we have about 11 days left of this round, will be distributed based on how people voted. So if, like the cool thing about it is like personally, I go and donate to all 50 projects because I want each project to have a vote. It might not be much money, right? But it's like it's at least spread out versus trying to narrow down like, oh, what are my top 10 or what are my top 2, and I give that same amount of money to those. It's a way of actually supporting everybody, and you let the quadratic funding do the work, basically.
Yeah, it encourages collaboration and mutual support, which again our current systems don't. I mean, even like if you're trying to be generous, they don't.
Yeah, agree. Yeah, and that's on the Twitter Spaces we were on, a few of us this morning. Like that's the cool thing to see is like all the the shilling, right, or the selling or the promoting of other people's spaces and projects and causes and then the sharing, like the dripping, right, or the splitting of like 10% of everything Basin gets is going to be split back to people who the projects who have come on the show to do this. I mean, we're almost to the point where I don't think we're gonna have all 50, right, or all 40 individual projects, but we're almost to the point we might just say, look, we're gonna add all 50 addresses, which is the cool thing about crypto and blockchain, to our 10% split. And it kind of like that's how ecosystems work, right? If you look at like the trophic pyramid and the producer consumer pyramid, like there's the 10% rule in nature. Like why shouldn't humans do the same in a way?
Well, and we do, right? Or in theory, like we pay taxes. I pay taxes. I presume you pay taxes. And so like, yeah, none of this is revolutionary. It's just that so like just the tech is novel, and so we can do things differently, fundamentally differently, than we've done them before. And that's why, yeah, I don't know. That's why I'm excited about it.
Cool. And so Joe Brewer's up next.
Joe's
bioregional,
awesome.
bioregional regeneration, earth regenerators. But tell us real quick before Joe shows up about the rehydration, like the logs and the backhoes. And I'm one of my favorite groups right now on Signal is the Ogallala Life pilot project, because you guys are sharing cool maps and talking about biodiversity and talking about sensors and where the water is going to go, and who's going to bring the logs, and who's going to move the logs, and should the chains, we need to not drag the chains across the soil to disturb the grasslands. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so our contention is that landscape rehydration, like we can achieve water security by rehydrating our landscape, and we can actually do this kind of cheaply and simply. And so let's figure out how, or at least let's give it a try. And so that's what we're doing. And on Monday, we're going out and like finalizing the truck route and stake in the ground, determining contour in certain areas. And we've been prepping, lots of prep, as you've referenced. And then, a bunch of helping hands and some heavy-ish equipment, like light heavy equipment, shows up Tuesday or Wednesday. We've got a truckload of beetle kill, like so logs from the Rocky Mountains that have been
from Colorado, where all the trees are dying.
right, and so that's coming down, and the only reason we need that is so like we're going to build a whole lot of small structures to catch water up high, but we've got these like there's canyons along the escarpment. And some of them get pretty big. And so we hope to build some pretty sizable, I mean, not huge, but, it's like a 20 to 60 feet wide channel. And it's dry except for when it rains. And so we hope to tie in some check dams on that. And we need some bigger things to hold that structure together. And so I think logs were the best way to go. And and then we'll see what happens, and we'll MRV it as best we can, and related biodiversity and all that stuff. And we're not, I mean, there's like many ways we could do it better, but at least we're doing it. And I think, well, we'll see how good it is, but I'm pretty excited. I think that we'll get some water, and I'm excited to see we have an audience. Hi, GMO of Silly Protocol, which is another awesome grant. And yes, so one of the reasons, like one of carbon cycles through the landscape, like water cycles through the landscape, and the current carbon credit agreements don't pay any attention to erosion. And my contention is, like, we're going to be able to sequester a good deal of carbon by capturing and distributing the sediments and silts throughout a watershed instead of in the bottom of a reservoir that dries and gets wet again. And so, if we can measure that, then we can put a methodology together that lets something like regen, you can get carbon money for fighting erosion. Hi, Joe. Joe's got an awesome project. Support them too. And thank you, Timo.
Will, thanks for coming. Everyone go ahead and support Ogallala in the Ag Bundle, and support Demeter at their own individual climate grant. Will, thanks for all your work and leadership and all your energy and enthusiasm.
Hey, Timo, how's it going?
Good, Joe. Nice to see you.
Nice to be here with you. Good to hang out a bit.
Yeah, cool. So real quick before we transition over to the next guest, just a reminder to everyone, we are streaming this on LinkedIn. We're streaming it on YouTube, so people can ask questions in the chat over there. or they can come over to basin.live, ask questions here. One of the things we talked about, Joe, with the other guests is like slang words and like, jargon and whatnot. So when we use those words, we want to try and unpack that. And you are a, what do you call it? A neuro linguist, or I'm going to butcher that. You are
Yeah,
a
linguist. Yes.
yeah. So like we want to, like, one of the goals for me personally, with this Gitcoin Climate Round is to bring in non-Web3, non-crypto, non-blockchain people who care, right, about earth regeneration, restoration, conservation, impact, climate, nature, biodiversity, but just show them that, look, there's a whole group of people building real tools and that there's real money available going to these projects, and then what people are doing with the project. So welcome, Joe, to the show.
Nice to be here. How would you like to begin?
Why don't we, I'm going to dig up your grant link. I'll post that in the chat, but why don't you give everyone just an overview of like Bharatchara and then Earth Regenerators, and how those two tie together, and also this great, travel you're doing in these, the weaving of bioregional landscapes that you're working on.
Yeah, that's a nice way to set it up. Let me start by saying that I'm Joe Brewer. I have a very odd and multidisciplinary background, so I've done lots of different things. But at the core of what I'm doing now is helping people understand how to do regenerative work at the scales necessary for planetary predicament. And so what we're doing in Bharatchara, Colombia, where I live, which is right in, if you were to look on a map of South America, we're at the place where the Andes are sort of going up and to the right and make a sharp turn to the left, which means that the Andes Mountains have this really like almost 90-degree turn in them. We're right in the middle of that turn in a network of watersheds and canyons, and we are doing work to restore the native ecosystem and to build a local economy at the scale of 500,000 hectares of land, which is the size of a regional climate system. And so what that means is we're not funding a single project. We actually have collaboration among a large diversity of local projects, and we are creating capacities for them to collaborate with each other. So for example, we have projects that are doing reforestation work to protect native forests. We're doing work around restoring watersheds, meaning some of the local groups are doing these things. There are people working with education programs for children. There's a local community theater for children. There are people who do trauma healing work with circles of women. There are people who do work with local supply chains and local food systems. It's really diverse what is happening locally. And the problem that's everywhere is local projects are fragmented and isolated, and we're helping them connect with each other and work at a larger integrated landscape scale. Those of you who know Timo's work, this is like the scale of watersheds and entire drainage basins. We're working at the scale of 3 drainage basins, 3 major rivers with a plateau in the center and a regional climate system. And so we were one of the really successful ones in the last Gitcoin round. We came in number 4 in funding for the climate solutions section. And that's because we have a lot of friends and we collaborate with a lot of people. And that also means, well, I'd love for you to fund our project. I want you to fund all the other projects too. Like I want you to fund Basin DAO and Timo's work, because we're collaborating, and funding them actually helps us because they can collaborate better with us. I just want to name that up front. While I want to pimp my project, I really want to pimp our collaborations between projects. Then one other thing I just add quickly about Earth Regenerators is I wrote a book a few years ago, gave away the chapters to start a study group. It grew to more than 4,000 people around the world who want to participate in these kinds of regenerative projects. And we collaborate in a lot of ways. So I'll just let it stand there to pass it back to Timo to guide the conversation forward so I don't talk too much. Bring us to the next step.
No, I love that, Joe. I think, Will and I were just talking about like the trophic pyramid in the energy transfer in ecosystems of like producer and consumer and the 10% rule. I think like if humans, right, start to transfer and like value, right, and share and collaborate, and so like what you said about like it's not just about basin, right? Or it's just not just about Barachara or about Demeter, but it's about the whole ecosystem and the different roles that we fill in the ecosystem. Like when I look at like Earth Regenerators and the work you're doing, and we talked about it when you were here in Colorado, is like you're working to mobilize people and ideas and then link them to the tools to create on the ground change, where like Basin's working to like fill that property level, the financing level of like how do the real estate fundamentals play in. Like the previous guests before Will were Nick and James from TaterDAO, and they're working on real estate LLC primitives that Basin is experimenting. And I'm hoping that like Earth Regenerators and other, it depends on what the jurisdiction, right? But like I'm hoping that other projects that we can create a toolkit for anyone to spin up any type of restoration or regeneration or conservation project really easily. So I love the way you put it.
Yeah, and one thing I would add is that we're in this really interesting situation where we received $21,000 from the last Gitcoin round. We did really well. And that money has actually not been allocated to the projects on the ground. And I want to celebrate that as a badge of pride and defend it, even though it sounds like, well, what are we doing? We've had the money sitting in my MetaMask wallet, my crypto wallet, for 3 months. The reason is that we have deep collaboration in our community. We have a lot of different groups, and we want to find the best ways to use that money across a large number of projects. You don't do that quickly. You do that at the speed of trust. And so I just ran to you now, like 15 minutes ago, I was finishing a meeting where we designed the process to allocate that $21,000 to 14 local projects. And as we speak, I'm looking in WhatsApp, which is what's used in Latin America for everyone to talk. And WhatsApp, there are all these messages coming in as everyone's discussing and debating if we should include more local projects or close it off and be exclusive, because it's really important to have these transparent, participatory ways of doing this work. And so that amount of money, $21,000, is huge in Colombia. We're going to be able to support an entire ecosystem of projects. Whereas in the US, it'd be like, man, paying salaries for a couple people, you'd spend through that in 2-3 months. Here, we'll probably fund 14 projects over the span of several months, different levels for each one, and the group's going to decide. And they're also getting better at making decisions together. So cool. What I want to stress is if you support us in the Barichara Regeneration Fund, I think the two things that we're offering are on-the-ground impact, real projects doing real landscape restoration, real economic development, real people who need that support. But also, we have a prototype, and we share it very openly with the rest of the world, and lots of people learn from us. We want others to leapfrog and do best practices like what we're figuring out how to do much more quickly than it took us to figure out how to do it. We want to work with other landscapes in other parts of the world to share what we're learning and help them do it better. So like with you guys at Basin, you're creating a set of financial tools, database management tools, and financial mechanisms to move resources around that will help all the landscapes that we work with, including our own. So we want to be able to say, all right, so how do people actually govern on the ground? You want living experiments to learn from for how you build your tech and your financial solutions. We want what we're doing to really help other people. So just wanted to name that there are those two really important pieces that are really valuable. Inspiring on-the-ground real impacts and sharing the learning with all of the collaborators that have all of their other tools in this ecosystem to speed all of us up.
So I love that. We were talking earlier about building in public or learning in public, and that's one of the points of this Basin Live on LinkedIn and YouTube is just like here we are. We're not necessarily making it up as we go, but we're like iterating on the fly, and like the conversation around like governance and management, like the Regenerati News Hour that Regen Network holds every Thursday morning at 9 a.m. Mountain Time. We're talking very similarly about the groups module that they're building over in IBC and Cosmos around like how do groups organize and making it so that it's customizable enough. It's not just a one size fits all. Like Barachara might do it different than Carbondale. Carbondale might do it differently than Toronto, and Toronto might do it differently than Kenya. It's like the customization and the feature set that's there. So it's really exciting just to be on the cutting edge, right, of like these new terminologies, new tools, and along those same lines, Joe, is Ben West from Gitcoin was on earlier in the week, and we were talking about the new Gitcoin protocol is designed to be forkable or designed to be used by the community. So like I could see your project, right, running its own grants protocol for your 14 projects locally are the projects, and then quadratic funding comes in and people vote. And how do you spend that money? Like people just vote with their dollars and let them see what happens.
Yeah, and actually, with the other work that I didn't mention yet, but Toronto brings it up, is we're also doing this thing called bioregional activators. And my partner Penny and I, and we have another collaborator in crime named Benji Ross. The three of us are, well, mostly Penny and I are doing the traveling, and Benji's doing the online supports. But we're going to different landscapes and helping them organize themselves and connect with their neighbors. You know this because we came to Carbondale in the western slopes of Colorado, and also jumped over to Paonia, which is the next drainage over, and helped you guys collaborate with each other better, because outsiders have an energy they bring that locals don't, and it just adds another flavor of how that can happen. And so part of this also is that we're learning things to bring to all these landscapes. And so I envision the future of something like Gitcoin. I have a direct line to the top of Common Land Foundation. Been collaborating with them in different ways. Pro Social World is another organization we work with. And people that can actually bring funding, where we might find $1 million in matching funds for our own grant round, and then run our own cause round for landscapes themselves. So obviously we would want an advisory group that includes you guys and Recommon and others that are thinking at this landscape scale. What we're learning to do in Gitcoin now is raising money for projects, helping improve collaboration, and we're trying to figure out how do we leverage these tools into spaces that no one's even imagined using them yet. Imagine a cause round just for landscapes. So a Gitcoin cause round is not climate solutions, but it's watersheds, or it's other landscape structures. Well, as you and I represent, with a couple of our friends, we got that group of people that could run that grant round. If we had the funding partners, and if we had a forked Gitcoin technology structure. So the fact that Gitcoin's going in this direction means maybe a year from now, we found $1 million in matching funds, and we're doing landscape bundles as our own cause round, because that's where Gitcoin wants things to go too. So I just want to add, there's so many levels of this because we're all working on different levels, but it's all about cooperation. How do we work together? That's the key to it all.
Cool. What's along the ideas of funding landscapes, and maybe it's letting the cat out of the bag a little soon, but we're talking with Gitcoin about running a basin round. And like you said, we have to figure out the funding partners, but like, as you know, each basin token represents a place on Earth or a purpose, which, for the time being, what we're doing is like, we have species. Like my daughter, for example, like these, she drew some species. This one is a Pallas cat. I don't know if you can see that. This one is a snow leopard, and this one is I think a narwhal, or a beluga whale. And basically, every single basin token can represent a place or a species, whether it be a wild orchid, whether it be a green salamander, and then running a quadratic funding round of like, what do people like most? They like the humpback whale. They like the bald eagle. And then raise money for perpetual purpose trust for those species and those places. So I would, talking about collaboration, like again, raising my hand and saying, let's do it. Let's figure it out.
Yeah, and I feel like we're in a really interesting moment with these Web3 tools, because like most people still don't know what Web3 is. But if you go back to 1994, 1995, people didn't know what the internet was because we didn't have usable interfaces. that people had experienced themselves and knew how to participate and found it meaningful. Web3 tools are going to change so many games and people don't know it yet. And the main way it's going to do it is that we're going to have control of how we manage our own technology to do the things we want to do without a Facebook or a Wikipedia or some other organization. I mean, like Facebook, maybe it's evil. Wikipedia, probably good. Doesn't matter. We don't get to help govern how it's run. And so this ability to govern it together is a really big deal. And when we're talking about giving money to projects, we want to collaborate about how we create those collections of projects, how those projects are managed, how people can relate to them, how they can participate, how we should protect the projects so people don't participate in harmful ways. This is about governance. And so much of this is about how do we collaborate in really effective ways, and including, I don't want the big international NGOs and rich people with deep pockets to decide all of philanthropy. I'd much rather have 10,000 small donors, like you do in crowdfunding, delivering money where we collectively decide how to do it. And that's what Gitcoin is letting us practice. Large numbers of people playing Gitcoin, and they decide which projects get the funding, which we're practicing governance. That's what we're doing. And that's even more valuable than the money itself.
So a question that comes up, I mean, we might as well just address it because we're talking about it, is like, how do you balance that when if let's say you have an NGO, right, or a big corporation, an ESG fund, who wants to like invest in something in their supply chain, or if you're Coca-Cola and it's water, and they want the money to go a certain place. How do you balance, right, the collective consciousness and the community needs, right, and opinion with like that directive from like the funder,
Well, I see two ways just to start as strategies. One is matching. They can match fund, and then the other part that happens is open and collaborative. Or they could have a set of options and people could vote on them, or just various ways of making the decision together. That's one. The other one that is much deeper is, instead of funding a project, what if the projects on the ground organize themselves into something larger? Like you have a portfolio of 20 projects all within the same region, and the large funders fund the portfolio, but the allocation, the actual distribution of money, is local decision-making by representatives of the projects. And they can have different ways of vetting and managing risk and all that, and how they make the agreements. But I think the real power in the long run is if we organize ourselves. This is just organizing. Local projects organize into collections of local projects, and as a collective, they have more power. But it's not power it's power in a positive way, because they also know what's needed and they know what the projects are. And that's the big problem for funders, is they don't know where to give money to know if it'll make a difference. So all of that is managed by the local organizing. The local people say, we mapped our territory, we set our priorities. If you trust our mapping process, then you want to fund us, and we decide how the money is allocated within an approved container. These 20 projects, this decision-making council, whatever it may be. And I see the long-term future is something like that. It's bottom up, as my friend David Sloan Wilson says, it's bottom up together with enlightened top down. The word enlightened is the top down knows that it needs the intelligence of the bottom up. And the bottom up knows that it needs the guidance and structuring of the top down. So you need policy making at the high level, you need emergent collective intelligence at the bottom, and they meet in the middle. And I think that's going to be the way forward.
I love that. If you don't mind, once we're done, just sharing that on Twitter and tag me in it. I love that quote. That's that's super powerful, Joe.
Yeah, and the other piece of this I think is really important is a lot of people want to make a difference and they don't know how. And there's things like, instead of buying a cup of coffee at Starbucks, give $5, those sorts of things. But you give your $5, did it actually help? And this is one of the places where there's quantification and the DMRV thing, which is basically there are different ways of telling the story and documenting things happen. And I take a picture of the tree I planted so it happened. I posted it on Instagram, so there it is. Whatever, it could be an NFT, it could be all these. Technology just helps us do the storytelling in this case. But what if there is an ecosystem that you trust? Meaning, what if there's a collection of projects that you trust? What if there's some way, this is one thing Regen Network's trying to do. If you know that, like if it's carbon sequestration, all the projects that have gotten approval by this network are of a good enough quality that you can trust they're doing something. The individual project doesn't have to do that verification. It's collectively accumulated by a network that aggregates their outcomes. And, there are all kinds of things for that go into the tech that I'll leave for another time. But just to say, what if the trust is because we bundled it? It's bundled in a way that you trust, so you can trust whatever's been bundled.
Love that.
And there are various ways of communicating that. I know you know a lot of this with your real estate investment trusts and some of those other tools in the real estate markets. The bundling has to be done well, but all that is a financial instrument. And the financial instrument is you trust what's in the details because you trust the way it was put together.
What comes to mind, Joe, is Sam Zell, one of the biggest real estate owners in the world, especially before the recession. He, in 2004, or maybe it was like 2004, I think, or no, let's see, 2006. So 2 years before the recession, I was listening to like a live stream of him, and he's like, all these mortgages, these piece of shit mortgages, what he said, being bundled together in one big diversified portfolio. To me, it's just one big piece of shit. Like it's like, and he called it, he was basically calling the financial crisis of like, that's not diversification. If you put a bunch of junk, right, in a portfolio. So like, to me, the beauty of what we're trying to do here is like the transparency and the diversity of the projects, but they do have to have they have to have a trust level, like you said, around that, that portfolio or that bundling approach.
Yeah, like the reason that we got so much funding in the last round of Gitcoin is that for the previous 2 years, I had been posting pictures on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and these kinds of places. Oh, look, we dug this water retention system. We planted these trees. Here they are 3 months later. We had these volunteers come from Copenhagen. Here they are. We're working with this local group. Here's one of the people. And everyone's like, wow, they're doing cool stuff. If they ever asked me for money, I'd give it to them. And it's
right.
like transparent storytelling. And the biggest part, I think, is that we also point out the blemishes and we share it when it's half done and we show our mistakes. And then if someone comes and joins us, they tell the story of what they experienced and we didn't pay them. They're completely, there's none of that like distortion. And so this transparency and accountability, that's one of the things that tools like blockchain can do, is verification without centralization. Verification without centralization is it's verified in enough ways that its trust accumulates because you're actually seeing enough verification of the real quality. And that's so powerful,
And I think in a weird way, like, in blockchain, like we talk about trustless, it's almost like that's what the system of trust actually becomes trustless, like because the transparency and the data is there, that it creates a trustless system. It's kind of an oxymoron, but I kind of think about it that way.
Yeah, and I've also noticed that in real human relationships, trust is the speed at which you can do things together and do business together. So we actually need trustful systems. But trustful systems can use technology supports that they just know work. It's like, I know that it works. If you say the data is there, I can check too. That's what blockchain and those tools, that's one of the things they're for is, well, everyone can verify. And so, and you build the systems in different ways for different uses, but I think that's like very, very powerful. And the other piece of this that I see with Gitcoin in particular, because we could talk about Giveth and Spirals and other projects to try and do several similar things, is that Gitcoin is something that grew out of an older body of work, which is open source software. And open source software, because GitHub, which birthed Gitcoin, is a platform for open source software. Open source software is basically we develop it together and we can all share it. It's not like private software where some company owns it so you can't use it. And so open source software is really interesting because there's a lot of decision making around ownership and access that there's like, it goes back to the 1970s, open source software. There's a multi-decade history of best practices. And when we apply that to funding and projects, which is one of the things Gitcoin brings, comes from that open source world, that we get to benefit from all of that previous learning. And so it's not to say Gitcoin is better than the others in any way. It's just to say that it's actually part of a larger body of knowledge. It's not just a funding tool, which people in Gitcoin know that. People outside of Gitcoin are like, what the hell is Gitcoin? It's like, it's a platform for you to give money to projects where they have found a way to take matching funds and find a really creative way to give more matching funds to projects based on how many people vote with their dollars. Because you get more weight for the number of donors than the amount of money. And so that's in a nutshell. It's a little more sophisticated, but in a nutshell, that's what it does. And that's using open source approaches for funding and decision making, which is really cool.
Yeah, when you talk about the previous body of work, I think that leads into what you're doing with, like, you know, your travels to Colorado, your travels to Toronto, the work you're doing in Colombia. Of like, I feel like in a way, Joe, you're like aggregating like local knowledge, regional knowledge, indigenous knowledge, spiritual and cultural wisdom, and sharing that. So that it's like previous bodies of work that are being shared across landscapes, and that, you know, that's why I love that. The languaging of like a tapestry, you know, weaving landscape tapestries together. So tell us, before we wrap up, just share a little bit about these journeys you and Penny are going on and what you hope to accomplish.
Yeah, back in the beginning of November, mainly because Penny was in Boulder, Colorado, where she grew up, and I didn't want to be apart from her for 2 months. I was like, oh, I'll leave Columbia and I'll go spend some of that time with her. But while I'm there, would anyone like me to give a talk or something? I'm available. And just by happenstance, I was invited to 4 neighboring landscapes. The Front Range, which is Denver, Boulder, Rawlinsville, which is an ecological corridor in the Central Rockies, the area around Carbondale, which is the Roaring Fork River, which everyone who knows you will know, and the North Fork of the Gunnison River, where Peony is. They're neighboring bioregions. So we accidentally discovered that these different landscapes could communicate with each other. So what we're about to do, leaving in a week, is we're going to Toronto. We reached out to friends in upstate New York and Buffalo and Rochester. Would you guys like us to come over there too? Hell yes, let's organize something. Oh, I know someone in Ithaca, David Sloan Wilson, who I just quoted, who I've worked with for years, and I'm going to give a talk in Binghamton at the university. Let's go to Ithaca and Binghamton too. By the way, Buffalo, Rochester, Ithaca, Binghamton are part of the Finger Lakes, for those who know that region. It's a particular landscape, very beautiful landscape. And then someone that's collaborating with people in Toronto is down in Cleveland, Ohio, on Lake Erie, really close to Buffalo. All of them are close, and they're like, let's just do a circuit and hit all of them. And so what we're about to do is go to these different cities, but talk about landscapes. And we're going to talk about how they can work together with landscape partnerships, with ways of collaborating, with ways of organizing local projects to create landscape funds. And we're going to be teaching that while helping them collaborate with their neighbors. And our vision is for all of the Great Lakes to become part of this eventually. And we're just doing like a 2-week rapid fire pulse of engagement where we're going to connect with all of these cities. So if anyone's going to one of those places, I'll repeat them. So it's Toronto, Buffalo, Rochester, Ithaca, Binghamton, Cleveland. Come join us. We'll be there between January 30th and February 12th in a tour of insanity. I think I'm giving 20 talks. But we're going to meet some really cool people. And it's all led by local people, locally organized, who are receiving us to help them with their local efforts. So you can see how powerful this is to connect to what we're doing in Colombia, because we're bringing everything we're learning from Colombia to all of those landscapes, just like we did in Colorado. But also now we have the people in Colorado coming to conversations online with the people in the Great Lakes, and they're all learning from each other. And we're just going to accumulate this as we go. Our goal is to get to 100 landscapes by the end of the year. We're already at like 15, and we've been at it for 3 months, and we think it's going to accelerate. So if you support us in Barichara, that just gives us a better body of learning to bring to all the other landscapes and helps what's happening in Barichara, which is beautiful. So that's my spiel.
Well, cool. I think I'd love for us to basin to help you add landscapes. Like for we're minting basins, like that we're going to mint the Soquel Creek up by Santa Cruz that flooded. So that's like another bioregion or basin that could be added to your goal of 100. So I'd love to collaborate with you on that. The Toronto, if you go back through Joe's feed, Joe a few weeks ago shared a map of Toronto, and I think it's called their conservation district or development district or something. And they have a really beautiful map by basin, right, or by watershed or by landscape of like the properties they already own and the properties that they're targeting. Like to me, Joe, that's like a model of like the way I see this kind of coming together. That's like a real world example of like in these places that this stuff hasn't happened yet, or it's not even close to happening, of like groups like Earth Regenerators and groups like Basin to work together and like, okay, what's threatened biodiversity, what is dilapidated, what's contaminated property, what is pristine, beautiful property that needs to be conserved, and start to map that stuff out, and then collaborate, and coordinate the people and the resources, the funding around that. So it's that map to me, just like, I downloaded it here. It's like, when you talk about landscapes and bioregions, a lot of people don't quite, I don't think, get that yet, but it's going to become mainstream, I think, at some point.
Yeah, and just to say, like, the city of Toronto has 5 watersheds that drain from north to south into Lake Ontario. And if you look at the entire Great Lakes, that's 20% of the world's freshwater. It's as much freshwater as the Amazon Basin. The Amazon Basin is 200 rivers in South America. The Great Lakes have the same amount. It's like 20% in the Great Lakes, 20% in the Amazon. That's almost half of the world's freshwater supply. It's 40%. So what does the planet do with the Great Lakes? 20% of the water, of the fresh water. I mean, this is a big deal. And most people have no idea. Just like another version that no one knows, 37,000 glaciers in the Himalayas. It's like almost as much ice as the North Pole. People don't even know that. And so because people don't know how to think at this larger scale, that's the other thing, is we go at the landscape scale, but also because we go to neighboring landscapes, people see that there's a continental scale, there's a larger scale, but it's meaningful because they work in their own landscape. Like, I'm in my own watershed here. I'm working with everyone that's within 20 or 30 miles of me, but the people 50 miles over in the neighboring watershed, we collaborate too, but in a different way. And so this way of thinking, I think, is going to spread like wildfire once people figure it out.
Yeah, and especially if you start to think of it in terms of the hydrological cycle and the water cycle of what that fresh water does for the greater like region or the globe, or what those glaciers do or don't do. If they're glaciers, they do one thing, and if they become water, they do a vastly different thing. So starting to think about the impact scale as well is important.
Yeah, no, this is great. I just love that we're playing together, because that's what we got to do.
Well, cool. Appreciate you coming, Joe. I dropped the grant link there in the notes in the chat, so people can support Joe's project and Penny's project, the Earth Regenerators, Barachara. But then, like as Joe said, support all the projects. Even if someone had $50 to give, rather than giving it to 1 or 10 projects, just give $1 to every, that's my recommendation. Give $1 to every project, because then the quadratic funding, the wisdom of the crowd, starts to take effect. So that's my ask. Do you have any other ask, Joe?
My only other ask is get involved. So you could join Earth Regenerators. There are 4,500 members. You'll find other things to do there. Or any of these other groups. Like, go on there and look at these groups, and don't just give them money. Go like, dude, these guys at Basin, I want to talk to them. Go hang out with Timo. He's cool. Take a hike with him and like, we need human relationships. The way I say it is, we need to be friends before we're colleagues. We got to be able to work together in the personal way through the tough of what's coming. So just get to know people and get involved in whichever, give money to these projects, but do more than that. Get involved in them, because we need, or if you have your own project, bring it to the next round, and we'll all get to know each other by playing, because there is no time to waste.
And that's one of the big things, like why I'm trying to push this on LinkedIn and YouTube, is like there's people who have great ideas. They already have great projects, and they're looking for funding, and they're looking for real world collaboration and help. Like, hello, Gitcoin, right? And these rounds that we've been doing for the last year or so, like, we're here to help, right? We're here to collaborate. So.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I really appreciate that you're doing this. I think this very simple way of just inviting people to chat and share it is a big thing. So I hope that you reach a lot of people. I hope that it draws more attention to you and your work as well, which I have nothing but praise for what you guys are doing in Basin. I just think it's awesome. And I'm looking forward to having all the opportunities to collaborate together in all of these landscapes.
Cool. Well, I love the landscape approach, the bioregional approach. So thank you very much. But just while we wrap up here, I just want to say thanks to Pranav from Refi South, who was here earlier, Kyle Smith from Lexdow and Colleydow as well, Nick and James from Tater and Cougar, and the Real World Assets Consortium, Will Masters from Demeter and Ogallala Life, and then of course Joe Brewer here from Earth Regenerators and Barachara. Special thanks to the Climate Collective, who's made this possible, and it's brought to you by basin.global. And of course, big shout out to Gitcoin. That's been the topic of the conversation, is the Gitcoin Climate Round and Alpha Round. So thank you, everyone. And as we say in Refi, LFG.
Let's grow. Here we go. All right. Thanks, Timo. Talk to you soon.
Okay. Yeah. Sounds good, Joe. Thanks.
All right. Bye-bye.